Hey, kia ora, Helen Brums here, coming to you live from Waikanae Beach in New Zealand, where it is a very chilly 49 degrees Fahrenheit or 9 degrees centigrade. But the real feel, because we've got the southerly winds coming through and we've got strong wind watches out right now. There's a really cold southerly coming through, which makes the 49 feel like 37, and then in the Fahrenheit and on the Celsius side makes the 9 feel like a 3. So, and for those that don't know, when we get southerlies here in New Zealand, they come straight off the ice of Antarctica, because we have no landmass between us and Antarctica to buffer. So, especially in Wellington here, you get those southerlies straight on. So yeah, we're a little chilly today. It's a little chilly out there. But otherwise, the spirits are good. We're very super fantastic and sparkling today. We've had a busy, productive day, and my brain got. I was doing a Q&A training this morning, and I mentioned a particular topic, and my brain suddenly went, so I had to quickly go write down what my thought was and then get back to doing the Q&A. So I've been brainstorming a little bit with ChatGPT on that one, and we've been having a very productive session. And I also got lunch, and my groceries arrived just before I came in here, so I had to get all the frozens and the refrigerated stuff away quick. So here we are on a nice, chilly, beautiful day. The sun is shining. That's why it suddenly got brighter. The sun's coming in the window. It's going to help heat up the house a little bit, which is awesome. So today, and I forgot, got to mention this too. I screwed up on the numbers again. Suddenly, I went from 2529 to 2560. So I discovered that error yesterday. So we have now reset the day counts. So this is day 2533. And we're on Porch Light Pet Letters podcast. I'm doing it completely back to front and everything else. And our topic today is a really cool one, because I happened to see a video about this today. And where was your family when they installed their first telephone? And I'm not talking about these things. I'm talking about the ones that had the rotary dials, that had the stalk with the little earpiece here, or maybe it had the receiver where you had the, yeah. And one of the reasons it sparked me, it was because this morning I was watching, it was either a short or a reel, I'm not sure which. And this young teenage kid is standing there. He's holding the receiver up to his phone, and his parents are telling him which numbers to press on the phone that was on the wall. So they actually had a landline hanging on the wall, and they were telling him which buttons to press. He was calling grandma. And he gets on the phone, and he says, well, it's ringing. She's not answering, maybe. And so then finally grandma answers, and he, says hi, grandma, and tells him who's calling. And he says, guess where I'm calling you from? Guess where I'm calling you from? And she obviously couldn't guess. And he goes, I'm calling you from a phone in the wall. I just cracked up. His parents cracked up laughing. I cracked up laughing. And he carried on with this conversation on a landline with his grandmother. He'd never made a landline call in his life. And that got me thinking about what other, there's a lot of kids today that all they know for a phone is one of these things. They've never seen a rotary dial or a push button phone, or one hanging on the wall or sitting on the table or anything like that. And most of them don't know how to use it. There's a number of times that I will see videos of parents who give their kids a rotary dial phone and a Yellow Pages, and tell them to look up a number in the Yellow Pages and then call that business in the Yellow Pages on the rotary dial phone. And most of them leave the handset on the phone and trying to dial it, push the buttons, but of course it doesn't push because it's rotary dial. Then they finally figure out, oh, it turns, but how far do we turn it? And I'm just in absolute hysterics over this. And then I suddenly realized, as a Gen Xer, and even those that came before me that are still alive today, they've seen a lot of revolutions when it comes to communications. We've seen a lot of change in communications over the years, going from not even having computers to having, basically a computer we can walk around with in our hand. It's just mind-boggling. I'm going to be 60 in December. When I look back over my life and see all the technology that's changed in my lifetime, not counting the technology that was started before I was born, but just what's happened in my lifetime has been very interesting. So talking about the first installation of a telephone is really cool. And here's a question for you today too. Actually, I'm going to ask you that one at the end. So let's get into the telephone thingamabob. So where was your family when they installed their first telephone? And this is a good thing to go back and ask your grandparents and great-grandparents. Did they have the box thing with the receiver across the top? Did they have the phone that had the stalk and you had the earpiece that you had to hold here while you talked into the stem of it? Where were they when that was around? There was a time when having a telephone in your home was a very big deal if you had a phone in your home. Before mobile phones, text messages, and video calls, the family telephone was often the only connection to relatives, friends, and the outside world. It sat in one place, and when it rang, everyone wanted to know who was calling. It changed the way families communicated almost overnight. Oh, I got to tell you a funny story about my grandmother. At my grandmother's place, at grandma's place, her telephone sat on a telephone stand in the hallway by the bathroom door. And the telephone stand had a flat piece where the telephone sat, and underneath there was an opening where the telephone book sat. For those that don't know what a telephone book is, it was a directory where you could look up people's telephone numbers and addresses, and that was the white pages. The yellow pages were all business. And then it had a seat that was attached to the table where grandma could sit and have a conversation with somebody. And so we had this big family get together at her place one day. And so there was my dad, my mum, myself, and my two younger brothers. There was my dad's sister and her husband and my cousin. And then there was my Uncle Rex was there, and with his family, with his wife and family. And then there was my Uncle Barry, who's the youngest one, with his wife and family as well. And we're all sitting around doing our thing. And this is one thing I miss from my childhood, is these family get-togethers. We had such a great time. Grandma and granddad would be there, and us and their kids would all be there with their families. And it was just their place wasn't big, but we fit. And that's all that mattered. So one day the phone rings, and it happened to ring as Dad was coming out of the bathroom. So he picks it up and goes, "Hello, can I help you?" And does his usual thing on the phone. And this woman's voice says, "Yes, may I speak with Mrs. Eakins, please?" My dad, being my dad, didn't just go, "Yes, sure," knowing that it was his mother's house, and the only Mrs. Eakins that they would be calling for would be his mother, my grandmother. But of course, we had 4 Mrs. Eakins in the house. So he sends around, "Would you like to talk with Mrs. Eakins Senior, my grandmother, Mrs. Eakins Junior, my mum, Mrs. Eakins Junior, my Uncle Rex's wife, or Mrs. Eakins Junior, my Uncle Barry's wife?" This was the fun that you could have. And of course, there's no caller ID on the phones at this point. Caller ID didn't exist at this point. And then this very quiet voice says, "Is Phyllis there, please?" Meaning my grandma. So back in those days, we didn't have caller ID. You could have a lot of fun with people on the phone. These days, you can't do it so much because there's caller ID and all that sort of stuff. So, but that was just one of the fun things I remember about phones. When we were living in Waitara, our telephone number was one number off the local fish and chip shop. So we would often get people, and you're on a rotary phone, so you got to put your finger in the hole and turn it all the way around till it stops, and then let it go. And so some people would accidentally call our place instead of the fish and chip shop to place their orders for their takeouts and stuff. And it got to the point where this one person could not figure out that she was dialing incorrectly. So we ended up taking her order for her. And so there were some of them that you kind of had to do that with, because they just didn't get the fact that you're going, "I'm sorry, you've got the wrong number. This is not the fish and chip shop." They are, and you would give them the number, and then you'd hang up and they would call you back because their finger got in the wrong hole again. And so sometimes we would take the fish and chip orders, and that's as far as they got, until the person turned up in the fish and chip shop and realized that the fish and chip shops, they didn't have their order ready. And this particular one was one of the most popular ones in town, so it was always busy. So if you turned up to place an order, you now had to wait probably about 20 minutes to get your food, because you now were no longer in line. Because usually you could place your phone order, get in the car, drive down to the fish and chip shop, find your park, walk in, and your order would be, and you'd be waiting like 1 or 2 minutes for your order to be ready. But now they had to wait 20 minutes because they had dialed the wrong number and given the number to their order to the wrong people. So it was a lot of fun you could have back then. And of course, we didn't have caller ID, so we didn't know who was calling, that we could turn around and say, "Hey, look, buddy, you got the wrong number yet again." But yeah. So, for many people, getting their first telephone was like opening a door to the world. Grandparents could hear the voices of grandchildren. Families could keep in touch across towns and countries. News that once took days to arrive by letter could now be shared in minutes. Every family's telephone story is a little different. Some waited years to have a line installed. Others shared a party line with neighbors. Oh, and we can tell you some good stories about those ones too. And many people can still remember their very first telephone number or exactly where the phone sat in the house. Those little details may seem ordinary today, but they were wonderful pieces of family history. Where did your phone sit in the house? Because most people only had one line in the house. You were considered like, ooh, very special if you had two lines, and some would have like a line in the master bedroom and one out in the kitchen and that sort of thing. And we had one in the office and one by the kitchen and one in the office in our place. And because you'd have to have it it was hardwired. So it was pretty fancy. But party lines, a lot of times we came across the party lines when we're at somebody's place who was on a farm out in the rural areas, not in the city, not in the towns. They were out on the farms, and the farms would share it. The party, if the farms down one road, they would all share share a party line. That even though they had different numbers, and you could tell by the ringing who that phone call was for. And like they would listen to the sound of the ring, and it would be like a long, almost like Morse code type of thing. And they go, oh no, that's not our phone. Don't bother answering it. And then they'll turn around and say, oh, so-and-so's out. So they're not going to be answering it anyway. And there were times that you would go to make a call and pick it up, but there'd always be conversations going on. And so you'd have to hang up and wait unless it was an emergency. You say, hey, look, I've got an emergency. I need to call the emergency services. And then the people would hang up so you could use the phone. So there was lots of different things like that. And some people would just pick up the phone and just listen. You want to know about gossip, people? Oh my gosh, get on a party line. But technology changes and the memories remain. The excitement of hearing the phone ring, calling relatives on special occasions, or waiting nervously for an important call are moments that helped us shape everyday family life. And it was when we had these landlines that you could make collect calls, because to call another town or another city within a certain area code and stuff was outside your area code was considered a toll call. You had to pay for it by the minute. And if you called directly from your phone, then that would appear on your phone bill. If you dialed 0 first and then had the operator do the connection, it was a collect call, because they were then asking the other party to pay for it. But there were ways around that. Like kids, if they were out for the evening and they wanted to let their parents know that they were safe, they would call up. They would go to a payphone, which was a rotary dial, and then some later it became push buttons. They would go to a payphone and they would call the operator and have them connect them to their home number. And of course, you had to say who you were. And so the kids would say their name, and on the last name, they would add the town that they were at, or that they had arrived, or something like that. And then the parents would say, no, we're not accepting that call. But the parents got the message. So there were ways to work around, paying for phone calls that were going long distances and things like that. There's all sorts of things. I still love that video with the young guy that calls up his parents and goes, it's Bob, we've had a baby, it's a boy. And the old guy declines the call, and his wife goes, well, who was that? She goes, oh, that was Bob. They've had a baby, it's a boy. And she goes, oh, that's lovely, and carries on knitting. So think of, for those of you who are in the later generations, not the earlier ones, the later generations, where you're younger, and the only phone you've ever known is cell phones or mobile phones and things. When did you get your first phone? When did you get your first mobile phone? So it's not just the telephone, the landlines that we had in the house, but even apply it to when did you get your first phone? What restrictions did you have on it? Who was the first call that you made? Think of questions like that. So in today's Family Tree Challenge, ask a family member about their first telephone in their home. When was it installed? Where in the house was it located? Do they remember the telephone number? Who made the first call? And who was on the other end? Capture those memories today, because tomorrow they may become part of your family's story. And then my other question to you is, how many of your we moved a lot, so how many of your telephone numbers do you remember? A lot of the places I lived in, we only had 4-digit telephone numbers, but we had like 5-digit area codes, because you had the code that would take you to the major city, and then if you were part of that major city, you then had another code. Part of the code was for the suburb that you lived in. And so you'd have to like put like 4 or 5 numbers on at the beginning of the 4-digit code for the 4-digit phone number. And one of my phone numbers was 7039. Another one was 6981. And those are the only two that I remember. One was Fielding, one was White. I sometimes get confused as to which was which. Actually, I think the 6981 was 6981. I think that was White because the fish and chip shop was 6980. 6981. They were 6980. Yes, that was that one. So yeah, that's, they couldn't put in this. Yeah. So, look at that. And then we even had, and then my dad had these old vintage black telephones. One hung on a wall and had like the dial thing there, and the receiver sat on top, and then it had a winding handle on it. The one that was, and that was in my brother's room. The one that was in my, and I actually like that one better, but the one that was in my room was a boxy one that just had, instead of having a dial, it just had a winding handle on it. And so we used them for intercoms in the house. And I remember we were living in Poru, and I had my own room and the boys had their room. And they would get up and just, because they were up, nobody else was up, they decided to annoy their big sister. And so they would constantly ring. So Dad got annoyed with this one day, goes into the boys' room, takes the handle off the phone, then comes into my room, takes my handle off the phone so that we couldn't call each other. And then when we were in Fielding, we had the house. We had the garage as a separate building, and then we had a shed that was a separate building where us kids used to use it like a playhouse type of thing. And we kept our bikes in there. And so Dad then hooked up one in the house, one in the garage, and one in the shed. So if Mum needed to call us in and we weren't that far apart, but if she didn't want to yell, it was just easier just to pick up the phone, spin the handle thing to make the other two phones ring. And then we would pick up, and then she'd say, it's time for lunch, time for dinner, whatever. And we'd go in that way. So it was, it became a good device to have around the house. So there's all sorts of things that you could do with those. There's just lots of memories around telephones. Yeah, and I even get some of those memories coming back when I'm doing genealogy research. There's places that have got directories. Some of the on Ancestry, they've got some of the directories have been digitized, and you can go and have a look at the directory and find the phone numbers in there, find the telephone numbers in there for businesses or family homesteads and addresses and that sort of thing too. So it's pretty cool. It was pretty cool having landlines. And the limitation on landlines was you could sit as far away from the phone as the cord on the receiver to the phone would allow you to sit. Some people had long cords on their receivers, so they were, might have been in the kitchen, so they're going to sit in the pantry for their phone call. At my mum and dad's place in Waitara, we had a phone that was in the kitchen area, well, just off the kitchen area. The way they'd revamped the kitchen, they had this little desk area where the phone sat, and then they had an office area across the other side of the living room where there was another phone. And sometimes you'd answer the phone there, and it's a friend, and of course you want to gas bag with the friend, and so you say, I'm just going into the office, can you hang up this phone for me? And so I'd run into the office, pick up the phone and say, okay, you can hang it up now. And somebody would go, and you'd hear them clicking it, so putting it down again, and then you could now have your private conversation with your friends. All sorts of things like that. And if it was in the hallway, did it stretch into the bedroom? And the only problem was that there was never any call waiting or caller ID, so you had to pick up the phone, find out who was calling, and for call waiting, you just get dirt, which meant that the line was busy and somebody was talking. And sometimes people would try for hours to get through. And there'd be times in some houses where they'd tell the kids, come on, it's time to get off the phone. You've been on there for half an hour, get off. I remember those days. Those were good days. We had lots of fun those days. But anyway, so that's your challenge, is to go and talk to somebody about the phone. Where was the phone? When was it installed? Where was it located? Do they remember the telephone number? Who made the first call? Who was on the other end? When they first installed telephones, yes, you had a number, but you had to dial 0 to get the operator who would then connect your call for you, and do all of it, even if it was to somebody else in the same town. The phones didn't have the capabilities to call each other. They had to go through the switchboard. So you used to have switchboard operators, and that's a whole nother. I actually got to be a switchboard operator. I used to, when I was based at the RNZAF base Wigram, I had a couple of friends who were switchboard operators, and they would bring all the incoming calls into the base, would go through the switchboard, and then they would connect them to whichever extension they had to be connected to. And sometimes when some of them were on night shift and things, we would go over there and just hang out and just chit chat and And they'll get calls coming in, and they taught me how to use the switch. And a couple of my friends taught me how to use the switchboard. So when they had calls coming in, they were on the phone taking a call and there was another line ringing, I would hop on and answer it for them and take out this lead and stick it in that hole for that extension and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was kind of fun. It was a lot of fun learning how to use the switchboard. It was kind of awesome, because this is a big board with all these little holes in it, and then you had these leads with plugs that you take from here to there, and this one would come in to answer it, and then you'd have to take the cord opposite it and go put it to where it went, so that you knew those two were connected. And then there was a light that would flash when the cord had been disconnected, and so you could go and undo the plugs and things. So it was a lot of fun learning how to use that thing. But those were the days. Those were a lot of fun things with phones. So if you have any really cool stories about telephones in your house or telephones in your family that people remember, stick them in the comments below. We'd love to hear those stories and find out some of the other fun and cool calls that you phone stories that we used to have with the telephones. So with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening